welcome everyone to today's meeting of the Scrutiny Committee. I would like to welcome Councillor Frank Smith to his first Scrutiny meeting and congratulate him on his recent election. So if we are ready to go, are there any apologies or substitutions to be declared?
Yes, Convener, we have an apology from Councillor Harry Coates with Councillor Hearn substituting, and we also have an apology from Councillor Sarwar.
Thank you very much.
I've just received apologies from Councillor Reid. He's had to go and work in the hospital today. Thank
you, Chris. And are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Hearn, you have DI?
Yeah, I have a non-financial interest in the Culture Perth and KINROSS part of item 4.1.
Okay, and Councillor Parrott?
The same as Councillor Ahern.
Okay, and Councillor Jarvis? Anne?
Sorry, I hadn't unmuted myself. A non-pecuniary interest as board member of Culture Perth and KINROSS and also HORSECROSS.
Thank you, Anne. That's very good. So there's no more declarations of interest. Kirsten, I've just realised we probably should take a roll call.
Yes. Morning members, when I call out your name, if you could please confirm that you are present. Councillor McCall, we've already heard from yourself. Councillor Hearn.
Present.
Councillor Liz Barrett.
Present.
Councillor Illingworth. Councillor Illingworth.
I'm here.
Oh, thank you. Councillor Jarvis.
Here.
Councillor Massey.
Present.
Councillor McDeed.
Present.
Councillor Parrott.
Present.
Councillor Robertson.
Present.
Councillor Smith.
Present.
Councillor Stewart.
Present.
Thank you. All members are present, Convener.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. We'll move on to the next item of the agenda then, which is the minute of our last scrutiny meeting, which seems like a lifetime ago, I have to say, but of the 9th of December 2020. Are there any amendments or corrections to be made to that minute? There's a I haven't in questions yet. So Colin Stewart, you have a question on the minute?
Yes, it's not an amendment or a correction, thank you, Convener, but it is just that we don't have anything on today's agenda in relation to item, sorry, I'm just scrolling down, item 8 of the minute of the last meeting.
Let me just have a look at that, and that is in relation to
scrutiny reviews.
Yes, well, as you are well aware, Councillor Stewart, I was going to make a comment myself on that.
All right.
Yes, as you know, most committee functions have been in suspension for the past several months while we work through the pandemic, but now that we're back on board, I've already had preliminary conversations with committee officers to start moving that process forward. So I would expect it now that we're back in the full normal working circumstances, and let's hope that it's normal working circumstances for going forward without any more restrictions, that I would expect this to move forward expeditiously.
So would that be coming back to the next meeting, or would we be having an interim meeting to set up the...
This will be moving forward expeditiously, Councillor Stewart.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions or corrections to the minute? No, then in that case, can we accept the minute?
Agreed.
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 Thank you very much. Now, today's agenda is specifically around an update from our 3 ALIOs, and there's we've asked them to provide a presentation jointly, as they have done before, to help us understand what the common issues are between each of them. Now, I seen Mr. Williams here earlier on, but I don't know who is here from the other ALIOs. Can somebody advise me, please?
Hi, Helen Smout here from Culture Perth and Kinross.
Welcome, Helen. And is there somebody here from...
Hi, convener. It's Karen Johnson here. I've just tried to contact Paul Cromwell at Live Active. I know he's had problems with Teams before.
Yes,
so I've tried to contact him to see if he's able to get on, but I've not heard anything as yet. Okay, so who is going to lead on this joint presentation? Helen or Nick?
Convener, I can start the presentation. As always with these things, Paul was going to start the presentation. However, I can take that up so that we can move on.
Okay, thank you. Audrey, can you keep trying to reach Paul Cromwell, please? Because I think a Live Active Leisure update would be extremely important today. Thank you. Okay, then Helen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, convener, and thank you, committee, for the opportunity to update you on the work that the ALIOs have been engaged with during our second lockdown and since we last spoke to you last year. We've got a short presentation and we're going to each take a turn. We might move Live Active Leisure slides to the end of the presentation in the hope that Paul can join us at that point. But we're very happy to take any questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you. So if we can have the next slide. This slide you may remember previous presentation, and it is really just an update of where we were, and it shows you the challenges, the performance that we had pre-COVID, to help remind the committee of some of the challenges and the context for some of the challenges that each of us now face. The ALIOs all have very discrete responsibilities and areas of work, and we work in very different ways with our communities, but the issues that we face are very similar, and you will hear some very common threads coming out during the presentation. If we could have the next slide, thank you. So our key impacts remain the same as we previously reported to the committee. Customer confidence and usage patterns are unknown at this time. We know that people are keen, and we've done research and we see research happening across Scotland and the wider sector, which indicates that people are keen to return to services and activity. However, the reality is that is a very slow return and a cautious return, particularly here in Scotland. And we'll each talk a little bit about what we've been able to do or not do in terms of returning customers and the focus that we will have in the coming year on bringing people back to our services. There will be an element that people will have an impact on their income. Furlough is possibly masking some of that impact just now, but we have seen rising levels of unemployment and changes to family circumstances. Each of us as ALIOs rely on income that we generate. We're very grateful to the support and the funding received from the council and for that to have continued throughout this crisis. However, the loss of that income that we generate is having a major impact on our services and what we are able to provide going forward. We will need to think about what our services look like going forward, partly because communities' needs and interests will have changed, and we're listening to communities and talking to our customers as they return to ensure that we can align our services to best meet those changes. Some of the changes we've had to make are in the short term, some limitations on what we can deliver as a result of the restrictions and guidance placed upon us to ensure COVID safe delivery. Some of those will be longer term. We've all made a major shift to online provision with varying degrees of success. We've had to do that very quickly. I think all staff would acknowledge that they're now using technology they've never heard of before, but they're using it very well. There's a huge upskilling agenda for us, but there's also a need to make sure that we don't forget those who are not digitally enabled and continue to provide services in a way which are accessible both in venue, in communities and online. And the change and what we now understand and know as a result of the pandemic about our communities and about the demographics in the communities means that we need to think very hard about who we are targeting with our services, who they are for, who will benefit most, and that will have subtle differences across each of the ALIOs moving forward. So next slide, thank you. These risks and challenges probably could be listed for any organisation that's currently trying to operate, not just for the ALIOs, and we appreciate that we're not alone in having these challenges. Planning for this year has been incredibly difficult, and I would think that any business would have had the same challenges in trying to set a budget when there are so many unknowns remaining, and we are planning very much in an environment where it needs to be agile and it needs to be very fleet of foot in order to respond to the changes that happen around us, over which we have very little control. We're seeing continued impacts on income. We are trying to claw back, but there's a lot of areas of our business that we're still not able to deliver that would be generating income, and that will have an ongoing impact. Our operating costs have increased substantially. It's not just the cost of PPE, additional cleaning and everything that you would see across the council's own business, as well as others. It's the restraints on our operating models which the current guidance puts. So, for example, in the libraries, we have a 72-hour quarantine process for books, which considerably impacts on the quality of experience for customers, but also the processing and the staff time for processing, which impacts on what we're able to deliver otherwise. We know that the wider funding landscape are beginning to make cautious moves beyond emergency funding, which they focused on, and thinking longer term about how they might support organisations. We all rely on external funding, trust and foundation funding, and resources. So not knowing how that will work and what we might be able to get from that in the future, again, is another uncertainty. We need to look at venue and programme sustainability. This is particularly true for our colleagues in HORSECROSS, but for any of us who relied on income and activity from paid for events, talks, productions. There is a huge issue going forward in terms of the numbers that we're able or allowed to have participating in those events, and what we can actually sustain, what would be viable. And the fit for purpose digital, I mentioned that digital challenge. We need to upskill our staff rapidly, but we also need to up spec our infrastructure, and obviously there are costs and time involved in that as well. We won't go back to a model before, which was predominantly venue. I think we will look at a model which will be blended going forward, offering both digital and physical experiences, and that in many ways makes us much more accessible, particularly for those for whom a visit to a venue was never going to be possible. So risks and challenges and some opportunities ahead. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Paul Cromwell from Live Active Leisure, who I believe has managed to join the meeting, and he can take you through some of the specifics of Live Active Leisure's issues.
Thank you, Helen, and welcome, Paul. Can you hear us, Paul? Is Paul Cromwell in the meeting?
I'm sorry, we've perhaps lost Paul.
It looks like it.
Convener, yes. Could we maybe move on to HORSECROSS slides? I know that Nick.
Yes.
So that would just be moving on a couple of slides to. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Can you take on now?
Thanks, convener. Hello, everyone. As Helen sort of gave an overview, we are entirely reliant on the events that we do, and unfortunately, under the current route map, the viability of opening our venues is almost impossible. we have imposed upon us under the current rules a capacity limitation, and whilst the theoretical capacity limitation increases as we move through the different levels, the reality of how you measure it, and that's the distancing requirement, actually puts a capacity on us that stays the same. So that means we get roughly 16% capacity in any of our venues. So obviously for the 1,200 seat concert hall, that gives us a capacity of 175. And in the 500 seat theatre, that's a capacity of just over 60. As you can tell from those sorts of numbers, the financial viability of operating anything becomes extremely challenging. And as it currently stands, we've only had one level of support from through Creative Scotland to mitigate against these sorts of things. The First Minister yesterday did indicate in the questions after the briefing that there would be some further support and that they will review the distancing requirements. But until we know the detail of any of that, it is, as Helen mentioned, impossible for us to plan. The planning issue for us is made much more complicated because of our reliance on touring work, both in the theatre and in the concert hall. Quite a lot of that work originates outside of Scotland, and the volume of work originating within Scotland that is of the capacity to take to those stages and to enable us to fill those audiences when we can is limited. The problem we have is that about now we should be completing and launching our autumn programme, and so the lead times that we're given become crucial. The challenge for September is you know, it should be on sale now, and we've already seen much of that work that was planned for September either move or cancel altogether. Promoters are holding their nerve for October, November and for the important Christmas season for the moment, but have indicated to us that if we cannot, in all honesty, guarantee them the ability to fill our spaces by those times, then they will withdraw the tours. Even under level 0, the capacity limitations remain, unfortunately. The other part of our income generation business is our business tourism work, so the conferencing and events business, which obviously has been suspended throughout the pandemic. It's unlikely to get anywhere back to normal until 2022, although we are seeing some of the local organisations that use our spaces tentatively book dates for the autumn, bearing in mind that we were on course pre-pandemic to earn almost £300,000 worth of hires. It's a severe blow to our income generation. I do want to just mention about online. We have had an extensive programme of online activity throughout the pandemic, starting off with our learning and participation programme and our youth theatre work. And we've done an awful lot of streaming from the hall, mainly in partnership with the orchestras, but also with organisations like the Scottish National Jazz Orchestra, Dunedin Consort, and with the BBC. We also created our very well regarded Zoom Panto, which was seen by about 14,000 people worldwide. We are experiencing a level of fatigue from audiences. People will join an online performance and then leave it with a sort of sooner rather than later. We are seeing fewer people start to log in to some of these events, and the take up is certainly reducing. I think that's a year of staring into screens for everything, is the digital fatigue has set in. The other problems that we've encountered is, as Helen indicated, we have come across problems with digital accessibility, both from a connection stability and speed issue, but also with those that are not able to access what we've been doing digitally for reasons that they may not have the devices or they may not have the Wi-Fi. at home to do it. And the final thing on digital is that it has not generated sufficient income for a long-term viability. That's a sectoral issue for the performing arts, and very few organisations have actually generated sufficient income for a viable online future throughout the pandemic, with notable exceptions around, the National Theatre, who had a huge archive already filmed performances. Can you move to the next slide, please? Against that sort of background, we are attempting to plan as much as we can. The viable model under the current rules doesn't work, and we think it'll be at least September before we will be looking at welcoming audiences back in a significant number, and that again depends on the distancing review that the First Minister announced yesterday. If there is no change to that distancing, then we quite simply cannot reopen, because we will not be able to make it work economically. To give you an understanding, prior to the pandemic, in the last sort of full financial year, we generated 70% of our own turnover, with the rest of the 30% coming from both PKC and Creative Scotland. We are testing some events out, so we're working with BBC Radio 3 at the end of May for some lunchtime live broadcast concerts, and that will give us a chance to test out audience management, and we're hoping to do a mini festival on the Plaza in July and August, but that's very dependent on fundraising, and we're hoping to hear about those fundraising bid outcomes by the end of this month. There are some online performances that continue through the spring and the early summer, and of course you'll be aware that we're hosting many of the Perth Festival of the Arts online performances as well. Our learning and engagement programme continues, and they're moving to an outdoor model over summer. Again, there are severe limitations on what young people are able to do, and they aim to restart in person in September, but again, it will depend on what the distancing rules are at that point. Underpinning all of this, we have, at the reopening of all of this, we have a challenge about how we rebuild our staff model in the face of uncertainty and viability. Obviously, you will be aware that unfortunately we lost a very large number of staff last summer, and after a year of closure, we need to rebuild those teams. But we will also have to carry the cost of some of those costs of staffing and training before we are actually able to reopen fully. And the uncertainty makes that a very difficult conundrum to crack. And during the financial update, which will follow, we may talk a little bit more about that. At this point, I will pass over to Paul Cromwell to talk about Live Active Leisure.
Thank you, Nick. Paul, are you in the meeting now?
I am. I'm hoping you can hear me.
We can hear you indeed, Paul. You're very welcome.
Oh my goodness. Apologies, everybody. Okay, well, I'll go through this fairly quickly just in case I don't end up staying connected. So, in terms of Live Active Leisure, there hasn't been a targeted fund and support or initiative specifically for the leisure industry developed over the last 12 months. Unfortunately, that still remains the case. We very much appreciate the support that the authority has provided over this period. And in addition, we've obviously utilised the government's job retention scheme or furlough scheme quite substantially. And we will continue to use the scheme where possible as we do continue to re-emerge. And I have to say that the scheme has been absolutely vital to the company's financial health. In addition, the company's board of directors have also made the decision to support the company's reopening plans by drawing on the use of the company's reserves in the short term. Now, in terms of the short term, and we all hope that it is the short term, we still have social distancing and we have regulatory guidance and the impact of restrictions, which I think my colleagues have probably already mentioned at length. All of these are very complex in most sectors, but probably consider that in the leisure sector they are particularly complex. And maybe just to give you a couple of examples to illustrate this. Currently, adults can have a game of badminton indoors, but not a game of squash. An adult can attend a fitness gym, but not a fitness class. and under 18s can play indoor five-a-side, but over 18s can't. And just to be clear, I'm not in any way criticising the approach or the rationale of these arrangements, but I do hope it provides a bit of an understanding of not only the volume and range of guidance that we need to consider, but also the varying complexities of each activity in sport. In addition, where we deliver services from a school premises, such as the community campuses, there is distinct education guidance, which also needs to be considered and followed. And therefore, we have been working very closely and with the support of colleagues in ECS over many, many weeks to ensure that school and community access can be achieved. The implication of all these arrangements means that it has to be a gradual reopening of services and activities in line with government and governing body guidance. And we do, of course, welcome the announcement yesterday that further easing of restrictions will move forward from next Monday. And this will allow for more activities to resume. However, operating under any tier restrictions with the requirements of social distancing does not provide a venue and service delivery model that is sustainable beyond the short term. And obviously this challenge comes at a time when it has never been more necessary to support public health and well-being than there will be as we emerge from this pandemic over the next couple of years. Moving on. Everyone is aware of the significant flooding impact of Perth Leisure Pool last year. This is a major project which is scheduled to take 12 months to complete. I am pleased to confirm that at this time we are currently on schedule for a planned reopening in September. And really just to reassure the committee that we are doing everything we possibly can to keep to this schedule. However, I do also qualify this by reflecting on the fact that we are operating within very challenging and uncertain times still at the moment. However, at this time, we remain on schedule for September completion and opening. Next slide, please. So respond and re-emerge. LAL have continued to play a vital role in the health and well-being of our communities throughout the period of this pandemic. We are, of course, more than venues. Our active schools teams continued to provide school and pupil support remotely. Company's wellbeing team did everything they could to stay in touch with customers, provide phone call contact, ensure that risk of social isolation was minimised, and provided advice on how to stay active in the home. Our community sports team continued to stay in touch with sports clubs throughout the region. And through partnership funding, we issued COVID support grants to clubs to aid them and support them through what has been an incredibly challenging period for our volunteers. When venues, and as importantly, our staff teams have been needed during lockdown, we have responded at pace, whether that has been Bell Sports Centre and community halls to support essential food distribution, or providing a very significant role in the organisation and operations of the 3 COVID centres in Perth, Belagary and Pitlochry. Live Active Leisure has responded. We have continued to deliver regular features, newsletters, surveys, online fitness content updates to all of our customers through our social media channels and website. We have also developed walkthrough videos of our venues to demonstrate how we are ensured COVID compliance to try and inspire customer confidence. It's absolutely imperative at this time. Our staff, who once again have returned from furlough, have had to undertake specific COVID awareness training online. And once back in the workplace, I've undertaken an extensive programme of role-specific training to ensure that all staff are confident with and competent in the adaptations necessary to keep everybody safe. At the earliest opportunity, which was from the 26th of April, we have started to reopen venues in each geographical area, begin the process of re-emerging. Our communities programme has also started to restart, including all ability bikes and community walk programmes. Moving forward, we will continue to develop our programmes in line with the easing of restrictions. An area of focus will be the development of children's programmes. This last year has been a disruption to everybody's lives, but I think we all especially want kids to have a fun and hopefully have a different summer to remember this year. So in addition, we will be looking to programme additional children's swimming lessons where possible. Again, learning to swim is an essential life skill, and we need to prioritise pool time to catch up on the disruption of this last year caused by COVID and the closure of Perth Leisure Pool. So Finally, just as we move forward, we will continue to review and monitor our recovery and progress. We will continue to engage with customers, stakeholders and partners to ensure that service delivery meets demands and expectations. And we will continue to plan and consider future scenarios to ensure the delivery of our services remains sustainable, moving forward and beyond the short term. Thank you for that. I think I was due to hand over to Helen and Nick here, but I'm not too clear on what's left of the presentation. So,
if we could move forward to the Culture Perth and Kinross slides. Thank you, Paul.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Just to continue in a theme, really, and again, just for a bit of context, in 1920, Culture Perth and Kinross venues welcomed just under 644,000 visits to our venues, and in 2020-21 that was just under 32,000. We managed to open 6 of our venues on a limited basis for just 5 months of the year. So substantial impact on what we can deliver to communities and substantial impact on our operating model. We've lost our commercial income from venue hire, cafe, retail sales, and have seen a significant reduction in the donations from our visitors as a result of closures. Financial pressures are somewhat masked this year by the phased reopening, our own use of furlough. So 2022 and 23 are when we will see the most significant impact of the pandemic. We have benefited from the continued support from the council, from which we are exceptionally grateful, and have received some COVID relief funds, which along with furlough have been very much welcomed. We have, however, had continued impacts on what we need to do as a result of social distancing measures we've already mentioned. We've had some success. Our digital offer has seen significant increase. If I tell you that we've had a 5,464% increase in our e-library lending in the last year. Some of that's attributed to our e-newspapers and e-magazines, but we also saw a 118% increase in e-book issues and a 68% increase in our e-audio book issues. That's a great success, and we're delighted that so many people have been able to access our services in that way. We've also had a 103% increase in our social media use over the last year, with engagements allowing people to get information about our services and reopening, as well as access to the collections, access to other resources. And we've had more than 4,300,000 engagements on social media, with activities and campaigns such as our Doogie Draws drawing national attention. However, that also puts pressure on our infrastructure and on our staff teams, and shifts the alignment of our staff team. We're also aware that we have an awful lot of people who are not digitally enabled, and indeed are very digitally isolated, and they rely very much on our venues for things like people's network and being able to come in and use computers. And we had just under 1,400 individuals who accessed a computer in one of our venues in the 5 months that we were operational. And anecdotally, many of them told us that that was their only route online, and that when we were shut, they had no other way to engage with the digital services that had all moved online. So we continue to play a vital part and need to have a balance in what we do. However, we've had no targeted funding support for libraries to date. There has been no national support for libraries, although we have benefited for some support for our museums. And what that means for the future and how we realign our library offer to meet those needs that we now better understand of our communities will be one of the challenges. If we can move to the next slide, thank you. So moving forward, we are in the process of reopening, like Paul, and attracting customers and visitors back to our services is our priority. We also want to extend our reach and deepen our engagement, particularly with local communities. At the time of lockdown, we had, in December, we had 6 venues open, as I've said. We now have 9 venues back open as of today, plus the 3 mobile libraries which are covering the wider region. We've got pretty much near normal opening hours for the venues that we have open, and we will be reopening North Inch Library at the start of July once we get to the end of the school term, and our other campus libraries will return to near normal opening hours once the end of the school term comes along. However, with continued social distancing and everything else, we do need to be incredibly flexible and just make sure that we are making the amendments and adjustments to what we're doing as new guidance is announced. We are continuing to develop our programming. We've launched 2 new websites. One, CPK Play, which specifically has a range of learning materials that can be used either in classroom, and I know many of the schools are using these, or they can be used in the home by parents to extend their engagement with our activities. A second website is a companion piece for our museum exhibitions, and we have a full museum exhibition programme planned for the rest of this year. And this website allows us to put additional content on for each exhibition, which allows people who can't come to the venue for whatever reason to engage with the exhibitions. It also means that we can extend our reach beyond our borders and indeed beyond the UK. And our recent Suture Festival, which was held at the end of April and was entirely online, drew in audiences from the USA, Canada, Australia, Denmark, Sweden, and other countries around the world. As Nick mentioned with the Panto, it's a great opportunity for us to take what we have here in Perth and Kinross out to the wider world. So we'll continue with that digital complement to our physical offering as a way of continuing. We will also continue to be curious and ambitious in what we do within the constraints that we have, and we're looking very much to be able to support through our activity the recovery of the wider region. However, we do need to avoid doing more with less. I think we all recognise that overstretch will impact on the quality of experience, it impacts on staff, and it impacts on organisational well-being. We are feeling hopeful about the future. It might not be quite the same as the past, but that's not always a bad thing. And there are significant challenges for us all ahead, but I think that if we can bring back our audiences and re-engage, not just online, but in venue, then we're looking forward to something which is a bit more positive than the last year certainly has been. If we can move on to the last slide. Just to wrap up, all 3 ALIOs recognise that post-COVID we are going to see more impact on health and well-being for many years to come, and we each have a discrete but important contribution that we can make to that agenda. It's incumbent on all of us to align our services to ensure that they are relevant and accessible to those most in need. And we are becoming much more agile. We're working hard to be nimble enough to respond to the changing needs and rapidly evolving patterns of demand. We have both the physical network of venues, services and people, and the online platforms, skills and experience to deal positively with any staycation bounce back that we might see, as well as community recovery. We will work together and with organisations and communities to maximise the opportunities of any additional funding which comes in to support recovery. And finally, I would just like to thank the committee for their time today. And Paul, Nick and I are very happy to respond to any questions either now or if any of the committee wish to contact us after the meeting.
Thank you, Helen. Can you hear me okay? That's better. Thank you, Helen and Nick and Paul. I'm going to take some questions now, generic questions, Because HORSECROSS has a separate slot on the agenda, that if there's some very specific HORSECROSS questions, I'll maybe take those towards the end, but if we can focus on general questions. From my own point of view, I fully welcome your forthrightness and your honesty in the challenges that you're facing. I welcome the fact that you're looking forward to how you open up, and perhaps once we get back after recess, we can start looking a little bit more into your financial projections and what the financial impacts will be to each of your organisations, you know, as we move forward. I think it's quite important that the councillors are aware of what the challenges are financially and what sources of funding will be available to you. And I think, and hopefully that will become clearer over the next few weeks. So now we have a number of questions waiting. I'll take Councillor Ahern first.
Thank you very much, Convener, and thanks very much for the presentation. I'm not sure if this falls under the category of specifically for HORSECROSS, but I've got a question for Nick, which may play out into the others as well. He mentioned about the capacity in the concert hall of only 175 out of the 1,200 seats. And I'm just wondering, following last night's test event in the O2 Arena, where they allowed a full audience without restrictions, and the UK government using it as a test event, I was just wondering if he's aware whether the Scottish government are looking at the results of that event and whether they're going to be looking at doing something similar or using the results of that event in terms of allowing bigger audiences in Scotland.
Yes, that's a very pertinent question at the moment. The Scottish Government have ruled out doing any formal test events within the performing arts sector themselves, but there has been indication that they will look at the data coming out of the test events happening throughout England. Obviously, things like the Brit Awards and the FA Cup semi-finals and the nightclub in Liverpool have all had a lot of press coverage. In terms of what is the most relevant to us, it's actually the snooker at the Crucible, where they had masked audiences but no distancing. And I really hope that all of the findings of these events is going to feed into the distancing review that the First Minister announced yesterday that would be affecting our sector specifically. So far, under the conversation that we've had with government, both directly and through our sectoral bodies, the distancing is the thing that they have not at all been willing to consider reducing within the performing arts. I mentioned our Radio 3 performances in a couple of weeks' time. We have invited politicians, clinicians and their civil servants to come and see what 2 meters distancing does to a venue as large as the concert hall, because I think they're perhaps looking at it from statistical modelling rather than the reality of somewhere that has a large amount of space like we do here in Perth. But I'm hopeful that there'll be some good dialogue in the next 3 weeks as the review proceeds, and that we might end up with a pathway that leads to the distancing reducing and eventually being eliminated.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Convener. Helen in her presentation used an expression that there's a requirement to up-spec infrastructure. What does that mean and what does it actually entail?
Yeah, so thank you, Councillor Robertson. Really what we're looking at is the infrastructure required to deliver digitally and to support agile working. So at the start of the pandemic, for example, we were not set up for home working, which is a fairly simple example, but we had to quite rapidly look at the resources that were required, the software that was required, and the processes and procedures around that to ensure that we were working in a way that was safe and that data was secure. Beyond that, we need to look at things that we know that in terms of engagement, people engage online much more with filmed content rather than still photographic content. And again, we don't have a staff team of excellent filmmakers. They're very willing to try, but there is a training issue there. But there's also about the right equipment. If you are going to produce digital content, it needs to be of quality that works across different platforms. We know from the work that we did with our audiences at Suter Festival that nearly half of people are engaging with online content on a smartphone. And then the next most popular tool is a laptop. Both of these formats need very different styles of content and quite different technology to make them work. So again, it's about having the right physical technology and infrastructure, having the right skills required to be able to know what to do and how to put it together. Some of that's about working with people outside the organisation, and some of that is about building the infrastructure within the organisation. It won't happen overnight, but it has to be a bit of a priority moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parrott.
Thank you very much, convener. I've got a couple of questions, one for Paul and one for Nick, if I may. Paul, you know, your desire to get back to maximum use of your capacity within the, you know, present restrictions and hopefully, if you like, whatever rules or, you know, easing of restrictions come in, and you'll adapt to that in due course. But in laying on activity, are you at the position where you can actually break even on that activity at the moment, or is in essence everything you're doing with those restrictions a loss leader, if you like?
Thanks, Councillor. Yes, I would have to say, yeah, I would use those words. It is a loss leader. Unfortunately, as everybody knows, the costs for actually running a venue are fairly fixed. And in fact, to make them COVID secure, your staffing levels need to be, you know, reasonably high. You have to increase ventilation, which is a significantly onerous issue, particularly where you have pool holes. And obviously your programme is completely extended by the fact that you have to socially distance. So yes, while we're delivering under the tier restrictions, then we are in a short-term position where we're operating at almost minimal levels of income compared to almost normal levels of expenditure.
And so supplementary there, if I may, would you be able to calculate for a future time if say you are operating to the maximum capacity that you're allowed at the moment, the degree to which that is incurring loss? Because we obviously want you to be making an offer. But the bottom line is, I think we cannot expect you to sort of go on offering you a loss leader indefinitely. It just doesn't make sense. Are you able to quantify that ongoing loss?
Yes, and we obviously had some experience of operating under tier restrictions last year, where I think our income levels were around about 15 to 20% of what they typically are. So we have already scenario planned a range of forecasts for this year, as we did last year. Now, obviously, it's been unprecedented in terms of what we've gone through, and therefore that financial forecast has changed based on whether we're in a lockdown and what type of tier restrictions we have. Every tier restriction results in a different range of activities that can come back. So we have quite complex financial forecasts which have been developed over the last 12 months, and we continue to develop them. But you're absolutely right. We can't, if tier restrictions continue beyond the short term, i.e. beyond 3 to 6 months, then obviously we're going to have some very robust discussions about exactly what service delivery looks like. But at this time, right now, what we want to do is try to re-emerge. We will continue to monitor our performance, not only our usage, but also our income and also our expenditure. We'll be monitoring these very closely so we can see what level of recovery that we're going to have on a week-by-week, month-to-month basis, so that they will aid and inform the discussions we can have going forward.
Thank you very much. And for Nick, if I may, Nick, I understand that the Scottish Government have made different decisions with regard to the sector in which HORSECROSS are operating, and they're taking their medical advice on that. But can you give me a brief description just now of where Scotland is different from England in terms of the timing of release, in terms of capacity, and the level of restrictions that are being faced? Thanks.
Sure. So the timings are fairly similar in that from Monday the 17th, performing arts venues in both Scotland and England can reopen. Under the Scottish level system, in level 2, we're allowed a maximum of 100 people on an indoor event. But in England, you're allowed 50% of capacity. In Scotland, that distancing has to be at 2 metres, and in England, it is at 1 metre. You can see automatically the differences that causes in terms of the numbers, and in terms of capacity, obviously 2 metres actually takes us to 16% capacity, and we sort of stop in level 1 in the Scottish system, where the capacities go up to 200, but we get 175 people into the concert hall. In England, there is an indication that they will remove distancing within performing arts venues at the end of June. The Scottish system has only got the 3-week review point, so you can extrapolate dates at that point, but there's no intention at the moment to give a firm indication of whether we would or would not, or whether indeed we should plan on the 3-weekly cycle, be it going down, each 3 weeks through the different levels. And then when we get to level 0 in Scotland, if you follow the 3-weekly cycle, that's some point at the beginning of July, we still have 2 metres distance. We still have a theoretical capacity limit of 400 inside, but the distancing means that we still only can have 175 people in. And there is no pathway out of those restrictions indicated at all. And that's what has been indicated to the sector in England, that distancing would be removed in late June if they follow their current trajectory.
And can I just ask, is that removal of distancing in England, do you know, dependent on people turning up with some certification of non-infection or vaccination? Are the two running hand in hand?
They haven't said it formally yet. You will recall there was an awful lot of debate around Easter time about vaccine passports for domestic use, or whether you needed to present a negative test. I think they will see what the outcome of the test events are to see whether the testing regime that they have made all of those attendees go through is the right thing to do. Previously, the Scottish Government, I think, have said that they did not want to have a compulsory testing regime, but I don't know whether their thinking is on that at present. It hasn't been mentioned in recent weeks.
And if I may, to pick you up on your point, in a sense, the drop dead moment for the autumn and winter programming, we are essentially on borrowed time on that. Can you define that a bit better? But that's my understanding from you.
Yes, so we would usually be publishing a brochure for the autumn at about this time. That would take us through the autumn and over Christmas and into the new year. And we're not in anywhere close to being able to do that because we don't know whether the shows that we've got programmed will go ahead at the moment, in all good faith. We hope that they will. We hope that they will be accessible to people without distancing, and therefore we'll be able to get the numbers into the hall that we need to. We need to take a decision in June about what the shape of the Christmas season looks like, because as you'll be aware, the Panto needs lead time to design and build the sets and make the costumes and recruit the performers and the juvenile chorus that we have of local young people. And actually, we're running out of time to be able to do that. And I do not want to be the person to say we're not doing it in June only for in July restrictions to be eased sufficiently. So there's a lot of holding our nerve, but it's very tight and it's very tricky for us to plan because we need lead time.
Thank you very much for that. That's very useful. Thank you.
Convener, you appear to be on mute.
Thank you. That would explain why nobody is responding to me. Thank you, Lisa. I was saying, Councillor Stewart, you seem to have, you want to ask multiple questions. Can you let me know how many you want to ask, because there are others waiting to ask questions too?
Sure. I think it was a couple of questions, but maybe a supplementary to some of the answers that we've heard already. So the first supplementary was to Mr. Williams. You mentioned that you'd issued invitations to your trial Radio 3 events to politicians and clinicians. I was just wondering what uptake you'd had.
I was in correspondence with John Harden, who's the main clinician who looks after the performing arts sector yesterday. He can't actually do the date because he works in an emergency medicine department on Thursdays, but I've invited him to come to any of those. Obviously, we're waiting for the rest of the government to be announced to make sure that, and then we'll know who is in post within government to actually invite, and the indication from the civil service is that they're waiting for all of that information themselves before responding formally. I do hope that we will have a number of people in attendance, and we have had response from Creative Scotland and some of the Westminster MPs locally who are interested in coming.
Okay, and on your point about the distancing, there's no, Councillor Parrott had touched on this, but there's no allowance for vaccination. I mean, if you know, you could allow potentially a certain number of vaccinated people and unvaccinated people in and have effectively a herd immunity at the event if sufficient numbers of people were vaccinated, but that's not part of any of the calculations around the distancing or the capacity. No, that's
not at the moment. No, and there would need to be a nationally recognised scheme to make that workable, because it would be incredibly complicated for us to do on our own. And I think there are big issues around personal data as well that would need to be ironed out on a national level, and we would not want to take that on ourselves.
Okay. So my question for Mr. Cromwell is, I think you said that some of the venues were already open from, I can't remember what date you said, in April. But there was difficulties around, you know, people were allowed to use a gym but not use a fitness gym but not attend a fitness class. So in the first instance, I was wondering whether you were thinking about organising outdoor classes, because I think the restrictions on the numbers of people that can attend an outdoor fitness event are much more liberal than indoor events. And also, if you were aware if any COVID transmissions have been traced to either your leisure venues in particular, or what the rate was for leisure venues generally.
Paul, is he still with us?
Looks like he's still with us. Hi.
Yes, it does.
Yes. Hi. Hi, thanks, Councillor. Yes, we started to reopen venues on the 26th of April, which was the first opportunity. In terms of, I think the question there was around fitness classes. Yes, we do have some outdoor classes, but what I can confirm is that indoor classes actually start back next Monday. That was one of the changes that was introduced yesterday in terms of just that easing of restrictions. So group fitness classes can re-emerge from next week. So we obviously have, and as you'll know, memberships are a significant part of our business. So I'm delighted to be able to say that we have a group fitness program in place already, which has been communicated to our members, and will start from next Monday. In terms of infection rates, I think over the last year, obviously that's been monitored, and sport and leisure was very low in terms of infection, and I think that was one of the frustrations that was probably muted from the sector in terms of trying to bring our sector back earlier, because of the obvious benefits in terms of health and well-being, and obviously trying to provide resilience to people by being physically fit and physically active. So yes, that continues to be the case. And the one thing I think this sector, like every other sector, has looked at is really investing in terms of how we make sure that we have COVID COVID secure environments, and certainly for us, it's something that we've invested in significantly, not only in terms of different cleaning chemicals that provide more robust disinfected surfaces, but in terms of training our staffing levels, making sure our staff complete inductions, which they have to actually formally pass to ensure that they understand the risks. We also had surveys which happen every 3 weeks in terms of asking our customers all of our arrangements are in place and that they have confidence, and do the same with our staff. So there has been a learning as well as we've gone through this to make sure that we are responding and that we're developing our practices to make sure that we are continuing to inspire that confidence of learning. And I have to say that even in the 2 weeks we've been back again, we're getting very positive feedback, and the uptake of our programs is very positive. The challenge is, of course, is the programs themselves are quite limited at the moment because of the restrictions and also the social distancing requirements. But it's been a positive start back over the last 4 months.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question was on was I think a non-COVID one, but a broader one for probably both Culture, Perth and Kinross, and HORSECROSS Arts. And it was just really to ask, elected members got a presentation yesterday on the cultural task force, which was operating around the turn of the year, and details of the creative collective between principally Perth and Kinross and Dundee, but also Angus and Fife, supported by funding from Creative Scotland. And I wondered what level of engagement, I know that you both had a board member on the cultural task force, but I was wondering what level of engagement and what the outputs, positive and negative, from the task force and the creative collective were for both organisations.
Yeah, shall I go first and then?
Yes, if you go first, Helen, and then we'll bring in Nick. Thank you.
So as you mentioned, Councillor Stewart, we did have a board member who participated in the cultural task force and found the conversations very stimulating and the opportunity to engage very helpful. I think the outputs of that task force are at a very early stage. We've had a briefing on the next step developments, but as yet that work is, as I say, to commence, but it will certainly be very useful work in helping to guide the strategic direction of cultural services going forward. On the creative collective, you'll have to forgive me, I don't really have any information about that one, but perhaps Nick might be more involved in that.
Okay. Thank you, Helen. Nick?
Just to echo Helen's word on the task force there, yes, we had board involvement, and I guess one of the key recommendations that I'm very interested in being involved with for the future is working in a very joined up way across council, across ALIOs, across charitable and tourism throughout Perthshire. I think is likely to bring benefit to everyone and enable us to move forward strategically. The other project actually is being run out of council, and we're not deeply involved with it at present. I think it's designed in very much in sort of community-based initiative and coming from culture and community services. So at present, we're not actually involved.
Okay.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Colin. Councillor Barrett, Liz Barrett.
Thank you, convener. First, I'd like to thank everybody who's been making the presentations for your perseverance in the face of all the challenges, and especially the way that organisations are working together, both within the ALIOs and beyond. I think that a lot's been gained through those. My questions are on social distancing. If the distancing, I understand from Nick that at the moment 2 metres means 175 people in the concert hall. If it went down to 1 metre, how many does that mean?
It gets us to just under, just about 343 is the best we've come up with. So
still not really viable?
Not really, no.
And the same thing would apply in Live Active Leisure, I think, Paul, is that right? For classes and things.
Yes, I mean, as you may know, we've had to, because of the social distancing requirements, we've had to move activities around different venues. So in Perth, for example, Rodney Fitness Centre is currently operating solely as a fitness gym. And what we've had to do is distance the equipment. So we've actually moved equipment into the studio. And our group fitness program has moved to Bell Sports Centre in the largest sports hall, where we can obviously create capacity because we've got large space. That obviously becomes a program in juggle as more activities come back and sports halls required for traditional sports hall activities. So what we're trying to do is obviously plan our way forward based on expectations of peer restrictions changing, so that we can make sure that we maximise opportunities to all our customer groups. So that in itself is a challenge.
Thank you. And just on encouraging people to come back, I know usually we've very much tried to do it by email, and especially, well, for all the ALIOs, but I just wonder if you're looking at moving back to using paper for promotion of programmes when we're able to do it, to reach out to those who are digitally fatigued or those who don't have access.
Yes, certainly in Culture Perth and KINROSS, what we've actually looked at more is radio. We're very conscious with paper documentation at the moment that that's discouraged due to COVID and not passing around too many leaflets and pieces of paper. And certainly postage costs are such that we're trying to reduce the amount of postage activity. However, we did write to all of our mobile library customers to let them know that was restarting, because many of them were aware are quite elderly and not necessarily as enabled online as others might be. So we've been making use of Heartland FM, Radio Tay and Pure FM with radio adverts and information going out via these sources as a way to try and reach people. So we are all, I think, trying to find the different ways. I don't think there's any silver bullet in terms of communication in any form, but we are working hard to try different ways to reach out to people to let them know what we have available, where we are and when we are open.
I would say that we're again following a similar strategy, and we have written to some of our patrons, but I think it would be imprudent for us to publish a brochure whilst we still have so much uncertainty around this. But a media strategy clearly is a key plank for communicating with audiences.
Thank you. And have you another question, Liz? Or
no, that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you, convener.
Thank you, Liz. Councillor Massey.
Thank you, convener, and thank you, Helen, Paul and Nick, for your presentation. As someone who uses the complex, I'm really pleased to hear that Perth Leisure Pool is on schedule to reopen in September. My question concerns the cost of repairs to the complex. At a previous meeting, it was stated that the negotiations were ongoing with the insurance company. Now that the work has started, can you tell me if all the costs of repairs are being met by the insurance company, and if not, what costs have LAL incurred?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, it is pleasing that we are on schedule, although I do qualify that. It's a substantial reinstatement work. I think, as you will know, in excess of, I would say, 140,000 gallons of water were removed from our sub-plant room. So significant impact was made of our electrical and mechanical and filtration systems. It's a 12-month programme. What I can tell you is that the costs are in excess of £1 million in terms of repairs, and that is being met. I have to say that our insurer RSA it's been very positive discussions, and that these costs will be met by the insurer. Now, when you go through such a project, there are areas of work that perhaps that we were looking at from our own condition surveys, and therefore there is going to be a little bit of work probably that we would have looked at anyway as part of our general programming over the next year or two, that obviously it would make sense to do that now rather than have to require further work or maintenance closure within the next 12 to 24 months. but I consider those amounts to be fairly modest and should be achievable within our own budgets and means.
Thank you. You actually answered my second question there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Massey. Thank you, Paul. Councillor Jarvis.
Yes, thank you. Yesterday's presentation was actually very interesting, but as it was rather high level, it raised more questions than it actually answered. I'd like to ask the three of you the input from, from Perth Leisure and Cultural Services altogether seem to be lacking. Do you know if it's going to improve? Because it was all talk of partnership and what was going to happen. And, for Perth to really get its place in the whole partnership, it does need a lot of input as far as I'm concerned. So could you maybe comment on that, please?
Councillor Jarvis, which presentation are you talking about?
Oh, the culture, the sort of way forward for culture. I can't remember what it was actually called now.
Okay, I think it's quite, well, certainly I'll invite each of the allies to respond, but I'm just mindful that they haven't seen the presentation, so it's quite difficult for them to perhaps have that background to respond to context, but we'll ask them anyway.
Fair enough, maybe I've asked a question that can't actually be answered at this point.
No, so yeah, I think Councillor Stewart asked something similar, and I think it's a very relevant question actually, so we'll ask each of them to respond, but if not, if they can't give a full answer right now, then perhaps the next time they're back at this committee, we can get a further update, because I think it is an important point that you've raised.
It's very important.
Yes, so will we start off with Helen?
Yes, thank you. I think it is a difficult one to answer just now. I think it's at the start of a process, and we look very much forward to becoming much more engaged and much more involved in the next steps. I think there are some really positive sounding actions, particularly that closer working across the sector in the region, and seeing how that is facilitated going forward. And I think perhaps there's something to come back to once we see more of that in action.
Thank you, Helen. Nick?
Again, just to echo the same as what Helen said, I think the positive future of collaboration across the sector, I think is a really fruitful strategic approach to take, and I really hope that we can be fully involved in the development of that thinking and activity, and play the part that I'm very happy for HORSECROSS to play in that. I guess it's a case of a lot of work needs to go into these things, and a lot of conversation and ideas and scoping needs to happen before a concrete plan can emerge.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Does that answer your questions just now, Anne?
Well, yes, it gives me a bit of reassurance that we will have input into it, even if it's at a future date.
Paul, Mr. Cromwell, I realise this is mainly about culture, but there's also a leisure element, I think. So, are you aware of this process, and are you involved with it?
I'm afraid I'm not familiar with the discussions. I'm afraid, so I wouldn't be able to comment at this time.
Okay, that's fine. That gives us food for thought to do. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you everybody for your questions. I have a couple of questions actually. First one is for Paul. In terms of your wellbeing team, and you mentioned specifically that some of those activities were opening up again, but things such as all ability cycling, for example, I know was quite heavily dependent on funding from the local action partnerships. And as all of us councillors know, there was no funding allocated to local action partnerships this financial year. So I'm just wondering, what is the financial impact of securing funding going forward for LAL on the wellbeing activities, not just the all ability cycling, but others as well that relies on funding either from the council or elsewhere? Yes,
apologies. I think I probably had that in earlier parts of my presentation that I wasn't able to say. So yes, I think, one thing we're very proud of is the fact that we do source and secure external funding to support the programmes that we deliver, particularly around wellbeing and community sport. We are obviously engaged with our funding partners, and we have been over the last year, and they've remained incredibly supportive. Probably the one thing I would say is that everybody's in a very similar position in as far as everybody's being quite cautious, and certainly nobody at this point in time is suggesting that funding will be stopping in significant areas. But there is that note of caution while people themselves and organisations themselves are finding their feet and understanding where they are and what their own financial position is. So without having exact numbers and exact information, what I would suggest is, where potentially we might have looked at, longer than 1 year agreements, it may be that we start over the course of the next few months, it might only be, 12-month agreements rather than 2 or 3 years, which in itself creates problems. But I think it probably is something we're going to have to accept whilst everybody emerges and until there's a clearer picture for all of these organisations themselves and their financial position. But in terms of the last 12 months, what I would say is we have continued to engage with funders and they've continued to be incredibly supportive.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any other questions. I think if so, there are no further questions, then I would like to thank Paul and Helen for their contribution to this discussion, and we will move on to, Councillor Stewart has a comment. Councillor Stewart, do you want to make a comment before we move on to the next agenda item?
Yes, it was a general comment, or a couple of general comments in relation to what we've heard from the ALIOs today. So first of all, I think it's probably incumbent on us to particularly thank the staff of the ALIOs for their support over the period of the pandemic. That's in recent months, that's particularly, I suppose, with respect to the Live Active Leisure staff at the Dewars and in Pitlochry and Blair Gowrie in supporting the vaccination efforts. But I know that all of the staff or staff from all of the ALIOs have been involved over the course of the pandemic thus far. So I think it would be incumbent on us to thank them again, and if the chief executives would like to pass those thanks back to their staff, I think that would be appreciated. I think what I've heard today, though, that's most concerning is the lack of a route map for performance art venues here in Scotland back to achieving capacities which will actually make those events possible, let alone sustainable. Mr. Williams indicated that there was a different route map in other parts of the UK. So it's disappointing that even when we get to hear that even when we get to level 0, that we won't have that route map here, and that's going to provide a significant challenge to not just HORSECROSS but other performing arts venues as well, because the same restrictions and guidance will apply. And I just wondered what pressure or representations we might make in order to achieve clarity around that route map to achieve sustainability of the venues that HORSECROSS Arts manages on behalf of the council and our responsibilities in that area.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. The questions, we finished with questions, and I think you've ended asking a question. I don't think it's.
Sorry, it's a question for the committee.
Yes, I'm not sure if that's within the remit of this committee to put pressure on government on behalf of the ALIOs. I think the ALIOs each have their own boards, and I think that's probably where the best route should be. But thank you for your other comments. Councillor Parrott, do you have a comment to make?
Thank you very much, Convener. Councillor Stewart has actually picked up on much of the point that I was going to make. First of all, thanks to Nick, Helen and Paul for their presentations this morning. But I am too struck by, if you like, the different order of magnitude that the problem, that the situation HORSECROSS finds itself in from the others. And I think that that there is a role in seeking to make representations in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? If not, then thank you very much, and I'd like to thank Paul and Helen for their attendance here today. You're quite welcome to stay on, but I think our next agenda item is to get into some of the detail with HORSECROSS, of the challenges that they face and the way forward.
Okay.
Thank you.
Nick, thank you both. Nick, I think you have a separate presentation for us. Nick, are you here?
Apologies, I was on mute. I'll ask Willie Anderson, our Head of Finance, to co-present this, and we'll go through some of the detail of the situation in which we find ourselves. The context in which we've just outlined is, of course, extremely important and gives us the position of ultimately incredible difficulty, because we cannot plan in a sensible and viable manner. Can we move on to the next slide? Willie, do you want to talk us through the draft year-end position?
Yeah, no problem. Hello everyone. Thanks for having us along. Yeah, I'm mindful that the reason that we are still coming along every meeting is because of past difficulties. So I think this is actually a really important slide to show you how things have turned around during the year. The draft P&L there shows a retained profit. Let's use surplus rather than profit of 1.1 million, which obviously looks amazing. It's obviously almost all COVID funding. We'll talk on the next slide in a bit more detail about that, but just to give you a picture, 1.1 million surplus during the year. And the balance sheet, which previously had a very negative position, 350k deficit in reserves, has now come back into the positive to around about 765k. So a snapshot there, and if we move to the next slide, we can talk a wee bit about some of that in detail. I'm not going to read the slides per se, but just comment on them. I think the P&L is all about funding received and mitigation against COVID, towards 1.6 million. The main aspects of that being the job retention scheme, the furlough scheme, and some specific funding, $750,000 from Creative Scotland through the Performing Arts Venue Relief Fund. I think in conjunction with that we have reduced expenditure to a very base level in all areas. I think one exception being payroll. When I appeared 6 months ago at this group, we talked about the outcome of our redundancy process. And we managed to keep the redundancies to a minimum because of that funding, just over 100 in total, but they did include 69 zero-hour contracts, so it was only 26.4 FTE. We managed to retain a core staff body of 49, which was significantly higher than we thought we'd be able to at the start of the process due to the funding, and that's what we're working on at the moment. As I commented earlier, the balance sheet has shown a dramatic change from a negative position of 358 to a positive position of 766k. One of the things we've talked about previously is the fact that we as an organisation were spending other people's money, in that people paid for tickets in advance and the organisation spent it. We now have a cash position that covers that. Part of the Creative Scotland funding in excess of 400,000 was quite simply to cover that debt. So at the year end, we are in a position where we can cover our liabilities. Having said that, looking forward, our unrestricted reserves are still at a very low ebb. In the balance sheet, you'll see they're just over 500,000, but they're only just 300,000 net of the advanced ticket sales. And although we've yet to set a specific reserves policy with our new board, I'm working on the assumption of 6 months revenue costs, which would be about 1.2 million. So obviously we're well short of that. And there's also no designated reserves at all to cover future investment. I think we will bring to this group, hopefully by the next meeting, an indication of our capital requirements that haven't been dealt with by the organisation for a number of years. And the last line there is just really a description of it's been a turnaround, a complete one-off. Nick and I and the board have had a position where we've sought all the COVID funding we could and argued for it, and we've reduced costs to a minimum, and we've got this base now to build from. And the next two slides will show where we are for 21-22. So if we can move forward, please. Lots of numbers there, yeah, and you know, far too many for people to take in at the moment. I'll just draw your attention to the bottom right-hand corner, which is the projected surplus for the year, which is a minus 30,000. So the draft budget does not break even. Because of that, the Horsecross board has only approved the budget for Q1. Now, Nick has talked at length about the uncertainties that we have, and the board has, because of, agreed to do a quarter-by-quarter budget as things become clearer, with an intention to approve a balanced budget for the year. The budget is based upon, as Nick described, a reopening in September, and it's based upon a big surge of recruitment prior to and around about that time. So again, the numbers other than that bottom right-hand corner are probably, you know, not that important in themselves, other than at the moment we're unable to balance the budget, but we are reviewing it very regularly. If we can move on to the next slide, I can talk a bit about some of the key aspects there. So things to bear in mind. The Creative Scotland funding is the same this year as it was last year. I perhaps should have put the figure in there. It's £534,000, so the same in pounds as last year. The funding from Perth and KINROSS Council is 114k less than last year. The Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme is meant to close at the end of September, having reduced through August and September. Obviously, we have seen those deadlines changing over the last 18 months, so who knows, that may change. Our assumption is that we will still qualify for rates relief. We've applied for the relevant rates relief this year, so no costs are included in that. That's about 60k. And at this time, we've not assumed any further COVID-related funding. I did take, hopefully, some comfort yesterday from some of the supplementary things that the First Minister talked about, suggesting that some of the consequentials may be available to be shared out within culture, but as yet we don't know how much and to whom and by when, so there may be something there. I haven't put a cash flow in, but the cash flow position forecast at the end of 21-22 is broadly similar to that at March 21. But a bit of caution again, we've assumed no material capital spend during the year. I mentioned earlier, we have a long overdue capital programme, but we felt it inappropriate to put detail in at this meeting. The next couple of bits, I think Nick has covered at length about our issues with potential reopening. A wee bit more detail about what may come back in the way of hospitality. We do intend to reopen a cafe and a theatre, but we don't in the concert hall. And unless there are events in the concert hall, it will not be open. And we have had some planning around extending our bar offering when we are opening. The last thing there, I think, is actually perhaps the most pertinent in terms of giving a framework to our reopening. Each of the individual monthly totals there is the net impact if reopening is delayed and suddenly events that are currently programmed in September don't happen, October don't happen, and so on. As Nick said, a number of promoters have already moved or cancelled events because of the uncertainty. Those are what remains, and if they all suddenly disappeared, that would be the net impact. So again, towards £250,000 over that 4-month period. And if we just move to the final slide, just really things I think to leave the councillors with, that yes, we have stabilised during 2021. Bizarrely, some of the COVID issues, and they have actually given us some opportunity in terms of funding. That has probably allowed Nick and I to stabilise things quicker than otherwise may have been available to us. But this year's still very challenging. We're going to find it difficult to balance a budget, and even more so given the uncertainty. I think maybe one thing I would say, and again, it's probably very relevant to councillors and our thoughts, are our recruitment plans, which would kick in late summer to recruit through September, October and beyond. We're talking around about 30 to 40 full-time equivalent positions. So again, you know, for the city, I think that's a meaty amount of recruitment that if we don't get this certainty over reopening, will be impossible to go forward with. And a final thought, the current reserves position is still a long way short of where we need to be. And again, that is much more a comment on the past that we've been brought in to deal with than the current scenario. But it is something that is foremost in our minds as a senior management and the board's mind at HORSECROSS. Happy to take any questions. It may be that either myself or Nick, or indeed our chairman, Colin Hood, who I believe is in the audience, may come back on.
Thank you very much, Willie and Nick. That's been very helpful. I have a question, actually, if I may start off with that. You mentioned that you now have a cash position to cover advanced sales, and I know that's a question I've asked about several times at previous meetings, and that some comfort was given before that there would be insurance provision to cover the liability of advanced sales if they were indeed cancellation policy. I mean, the position is good. I'm very glad to hear it, that you now have a position in place to cover that liability. But do you intend and anticipate that being an ongoing position to hold, that you will always have some contingency to cover those liabilities?
Yes, absolutely. That you know, for me, from a strict accounting perspective, that's somebody else's money. So we need to plan that's always covered. That for me, that's an absolute given, and certainly in our financial planning, that will always be the case.
Just to add to that, the investment through the Performing Arts Venue Relief Funding that we got last summer, that recapitalised that ticket income, I think has probably been the most fundamentally important bit of turning us around to a more stable position, because it has allowed us to stop spending other people's money, as this organisation had been doing for quite some time, and as a result, it's allowed us to shift the model away from what was a very hand-to-mouth existence, and give us the breathing space to be able to plan more effectively.
Well, that's music to my ears. I worked in finance before I moved into other roles, and so we always had some contingency in place to cover those sorts of liabilities in any organisation I'd been in. So I was quite shocked when I first seen that HORSECROSS, before you both joined, did not have that position. So thank you very much indeed, and I think it's very prudent to have that as an ongoing position to hold. So thank you. So we have a number of questions coming up. We'll go to Councillor Liz Barrett first, followed by Councillor Liz Barrett first, followed by Councillor Parrott. So Liz.
Thank you, Convener. I'm pleased to see that the financial position and the projections look much better than the ones presented back in September, and I'd just say well done for managing to sort things out, you know, and as Sheila says, get the reserves sorted out as well. I just wanted to ask if my reading is right, that if we can't reopen by December, the deficit would then increase by 241,000. So that takes it up to 271,000. and that would leave only 30,000 of net reserves at the end of the year. Is that right, Willie?
Yeah, in simple terms, that is right. I mean, I think if we were in that doomsday position, for want of a better phrase, I think our board would be bound to take other actions, you know, to mitigate that. And unfortunately, those other actions would be not recruiting those 30 FTE jobs and potentially not being able to maintain all the roles that are currently there.
Thank you. I thought that looked scary. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Liz. Councillor Parrott.
Thank you very much, Convener. It's immediately apparent to me that the pandemic has offered Horsecross here, you know, both negatives and positives, and we're in the situation now where we need to try and benefit from those positives as much as possible, but the situation presently doesn't allow it, and I think we have to look at that. But my question is in one particular area. Presumably you're not considering reopening the cafe in the concert hall because its figures, if you like, in contrast to the one in the theatre, in terms of a full-time operation, just don't justify it. Is that the case?
Yes, pretty much so. The previous operation of the cafe and the concert hall had a number of curiosities to it. Firstly, because of the range of conferences that we used to host, it was regularly closed because we had to maintain that space for conference catering requirements. It also had a very erratic attendance in the daytime, so you know, there was no pattern that allowed us to plan and staff it accordingly. There were days when you would have a handful of people in all day, and other days when you'd have a busy lunch service. So we've taken the decision that a fully operational all-day cafe isn't viable in that space. The cafe at the theatre was very much more consistent in its attendance throughout the day. We will make some changes to what that cafe offer is. We will recite the main service points so that it'll actually be on the High Street entrance in the light and bright white room space, and redevelop what the offer is as well. But the catering function will come back in a different form to what it was. That's something that is hopefully much more responsive to what local people want and need from us, and one that supports audiences coming in to see shows in a positive way and a flexible way across both spaces.
And just a question that might be as much a comment, I suppose. I'm very intrigued by what you're saying about an enhanced bar offering, and if I can offer constructive criticism based on my experience, one of the enhancements that could be made is speed of service. I would have thought that a concert hall bar needs to offer very speedy service, and I have to say, frankly, in the past, that hasn't been my experience.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. We're very aware of some of those things. In terms of the bar in the concert hall especially, we are looking at where we might cite additional sales points for the bar, because the main bar is not sufficient in its capacity for a busy night in the hall, as well as looking at how and what we are serving to make it much easier and much quicker to serve people who'd like to get a drink either before the show or during an interval.
Many thanks.
Thank you. Just if I may make a comment at this point, Nick, I'm really pleased to hear that there will be an entrance to the theatre cafe from the High Street. I think that was much more traditional and people were used to doing that. So that's good news. Now can we have Councillor Colin Stewart? You have a question, Colin?
Thank you, Convener. So 2 questions, I think. The first question is, Mr. Anderson, you touched very briefly on the lack of, or both touched on the lack of money to support the capital programme. But Mr. Anderson, you specifically said there was a programme of works there which you were simply not able to, of overdue works or planned works, which you were simply not able to progress. Could you give us a flavour of the magnitude of that over the next 1, 2, 3 years, and just a very brief flavour of what those items are?
So I think it would be inappropriate for me to go into too much detail in terms of figures, other than you know, to give you an example of the types of things. I think the IT infrastructure is hugely outdated, you know, and for an organisation that, you know, will have in excess of 100 FTE employees when it's fully employed, you can imagine what that's going to entail. The biggest infrastructure deficit is in the kit needed to make the shows. So our head of technical services tells me, and I really want to caveat any figure I may mention here, but certainly many hundreds of thousands of pounds. So I mean, it's not going to be tens of thousands. It is, and hence why I didn't want to detail too much here. We've recently made the decision to invest in some software that allows us to track and trace what our assets are, which was a real deficit in the organisation. So that's just beginning that process, and it'll also allow us to plan investment on our key assets through the same process. So again, that's why I was sort of keen to mention that our plans that were shown didn't have capital investment, but that they are going to be substantial, and that I felt that, you know, in 3 months' time we will be able to give the members an indication of what we're actually going to need. And I think the key thing there is it's investment that will allow the organisation to keep pace with the sector. There is a danger that if we don't keep moving along, then suddenly we're not going to be able to provide the events and shows that our audiences would expect, and they would expect if they went to other venues around the country. So it's essentially technology based in that respect.
Okay, thanks. I think that gives us an idea. But if you come back when you're ready to with a firmer thing, I think that would be helpful for elected members. I was conscious that during this year's budget process we had far less engagement with all three of the allies, in fact, in terms of revenue spend, and that there were, I think, unfortunately, some items that were missed, some things that were not communicated and got lost in translation from the allios to the through the council structures to the elected members. My second question was, I don't know if I think you said, Mr. Williams, that Mr. Hood might be here, but I don't see him on the meeting list. I don't want to put you in a situation of answering on behalf of the board members if he's not here, if you don't feel comfortable with it. But at the time of the departure of the prior board, elected members did get communication from departing board members, which I think indicated that they felt that there was a lack of support from and a lack of appropriate support and communication from the council. So my question, I suppose, is twofold. How close are we to having now in place a fully reinstated board and that being up and running? And has that relationship between the council and the board of HORSECROSS improved, or are there still communication difficulties there?
I'm not sure whether Colin is here or not. Perhaps he's in the public gallery rather than in the presentation meeting. I don't know. In terms of the board, members will be aware that we have gone through a public round of recruitment for independent board members recently, through which we found Colin Hood, our new chairman, and additional trustees, also including one who will chair our Finance and General Purposes subcommittee. We made a choice to keep open a couple of other spaces to ensure that we can have both additional skills and for rotational purposes, to make sure that we don't have board members retiring en masse when they get to the end of their terms. You know, we have continued to work on communication and relationships between HORSECROSS and council officers throughout the pandemic, and will continue to do so. And you know, it's important that we can say the things that are important to us, and that is a two-way conversation as well. I think you know, we have ongoing and deep engagement with council officers, and have continued to, you know, provide information as required, and you know, help them to understand the difficulty of the situation that we're in the way that we've hopefully helped members of this committee understand today as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The new chair was indeed invited, but I don't think he's managed to attend the meeting today, which is a little bit disappointing, but perhaps we can rectify that with our new improved communications, Nick. I actually have a little bit of a follow-up question in terms of the cafe and bar. It's just occurred to me as we were going through this, if I may, that you have outside areas, particularly at the theatre and also at the concert hall, and I'm just wondering what opportunities you've explored to utilise those spaces to be able to offer services outside, which allows for more capacity.
So we have regularly used HORSECROSS Plaza historically, and our mini festival that we're planning for late July, August will take place on HORSECROSS Plaza. We sort of have designed it to be outdoor as a way for people to start to return and feel safe as far as they can, but it will make use of the foyer facilities and the catering facilities there. We are licensed to use that space for both performance and for food and drink. We have a little bit more difficulty with outdoor spaces at the theatre, not least because the Mill Street entrance to the theatre, the paved space outside, is actually in shade for most of the day and might be a little chilly, but our youth theatre are looking at a variety of spaces that they will use for their summer production, which will pop up across Perth city centre. At present, we do not have a team available to us to run an ongoing catering offer, and our ability to recruit and keep those people actually entirely links into the pathway to reopening. If we had a clearer pathway, then we could make a much more informed decision about whether we could run something more on a more ongoing basis on the plaza than we're able to at present. At present, it poses an enormous risk for us to try and open something outside when we don't have the staff currently on payroll, and we don't have a clear pathway to return that will allow us to continue to pay those staff over the gaps and the potential stop-start nature of that pathway to reopening. It's, you know, in the end, our core purpose is performing arts, and the food and beverage is part of our trading subsidiary that is designed to support the delivery of the performing arts, and I think it's important that we put our focus on our core purpose at this moment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ahern, you have a question?
Yes, thank you very much, Convener. And my question, I think, is directed to Mr. Anderson. You mentioned, both of you mentioned a couple of times about the reserve strategy, and it was almost an apologetic statement on the last part of the last slide, where you said that the current reserve position is a long way short of acceptable for an organisation of your size. Bearing in mind you started off from either a zero or a negative position last year, I'm just wanting to ask Mr. Anderson, how long would you normally expect an organisation of your size to achieve a reserve strategy of, you quoted 1.2 million, which is 6 months. So how long would you expect an organisation normally to reach that reserve position?
Yeah, it's an I guess I'd probably say that Scotland's reserve position is currently an aspirational position in my mind. You know, we're not going to reach that position within, you know, 2 or 3 years or whatever. It's going to be a target, unless in case we find ourselves in a doomsday scenario again, such as we have done over the last 15 to 18 months. I would like to think, and I say this not having been discussed in our own finance committee or board yet, but I would like to think that we should be looking to build reserves by a 6-figure sum each year over the next few years. But I have to say, I don't have the knowledge of a cycle of our organisation post-pandemic to know how realistic that is. But that's what I'll be looking to build into the budgets going forward, if at all possible.
So really, the statement you put was long way short of acceptable. Really, what we should be looking at is the fact of what you've done, and you've started to get a reserve position. In fact, is acceptable in the current climate, and not what you've stated there as a long way short of acceptable.
I think that the position that's happened in 2021 is the result of the very unique year and the very unique set of circumstances that allowed us to access all of this additional funding, which has turned things around. So in terms of the year, I would say yes, it's, in your words, very acceptable, yes. But in terms of the security and safety of the organisation going forward, I'm very nervous a reserve position that's still as low as that, and I would be advising my board that it needs to be a lot higher.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? There doesn't seem to be, so I'll take comments in a moment if there are any comments, but I just want to thank both Willie and Nick for their attendance here today and for their very welcome financial report, which has certainly given some reassurance to me that there's a plan ahead that's realistic, which is always you know, good to see. And I look forward to seeing ongoing progress going forward. And I have no other questions or comments to make. If anybody else has anything, can they put a C in the chat box now, please? There's nothing. Okay then. Oops. Councillors, I will see Councillor Stewart. I was expecting something from you, so I'm glad I didn't move on. Councillor Stewart, you have some comments to make.
Yeah, I think I would. Having heard more detail on the financial position there, you know, in respect of, I think you welcomed yourself the position on advanced tickets. Mm-hmm. The whole position with respect to advanced tickets is, you know, improving the policies and security around that is neither here nor there unless we can actually get back to having sustainable performances. So I think I would go back to my comment from the previous event. I think we should ask you, convener, to write on behalf of the committee, because our duty is not only to scrutinise the performance of the ALIOs, but it's also to support them where we can. I think that it would be appropriate for you on behalf of the committee to write to the Scottish Government, and not to put pressure on them, but as I said in my earlier comments, to make representation about seeking a route map to normality and to full occupancy performances with either limited or zero social distancing, as there is a route map in England, not just for the benefit of Horsecross that we've heard from, but the point that I was making earlier was that this will apply to the other performance arts venues. I mean, I think of Pitlochry Festival Theatre, Burnham Arts, but also all of the other venues that put on performances. So the town halls, the theatrical performances that communities put on, or amateur groups. I know that CPK venues have been used for performances before, and there are also all of the hospitality venues that would put on performances. So I think we should formally, if you would accept that convener's suggestion, rights to make representation to the Scottish Government on certainty around a route map, as there is in England, to return to normality for performance arts venues in Perth and Kinross and across Scotland.
Thank you for that suggestion, Councillor Stewart. I think I'd be more minded to speak to the Leader of the Council and ask him to write on behalf of the entire Council to the Scottish Government and do it that way. I think that's probably a more appropriate way to do so, and if the rest of the committee is in agreement with that, then that's the route I will pursue. So unless there's any dissent, I'm going to assume that there's agreement. Councillor McDade, do you have a comment to make? Councillor Xander McDade, are you still here with us? Does anyone know if Councillor McDade is available?
He is, convener, but he seems to be having problems with his microphone.
Okay. Does anyone have any other comments to make? We'll give Councillor McDade a couple of minutes, I think.
Can you hear me, convener?
I can indeed hear you, Xander.
Thank you. Apologies, I don't know what's going on this morning, but
it feels a bit like Eurovision since we're talking about cultural things when people can't come in. Councillor McDade.
Well, I'll refrain from scoring anything. I just wanted to support Councillor Stewart and yourselves' comments there around writing to the government around this. I think your suggestion of Leader of the Council doing it on behalf of the whole Council is entirely appropriate. I just would support that someone does write, because I think Councillor Stewart's point is correct, that whilst we are here to scrutinise, we're also here to try and support our venues, not just our alios, but actually venues across Perth and Kinross, as the town halls, village halls, and help return our communities to a sense of normality. So I would very much support yourself and Councillor Stewart in that regard, and I'm going to stop there while I'm still having success here.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McDade. Then if we have no other questions, then all that remains for me is to thank everyone for attending today, and particularly our invited guests from the three alios, HORSECROSS, Live Active Leisure, and from Culture Perth and Kinross. And I will call on Councillor Stewart. I see you have a question now.
Yeah, so if we've finished with the substantive business of the meeting, when we had used to meet in person, at the end of the meeting we would sometimes in public or sometimes in private go into a session where we would discuss future business of the committee. I know that we've had a discussion about the scrutiny reviews, but wondered whether it would be appropriate to have such a discussion at some point.
Well, I have actually had that conversation with committee, with council committee officers, and we will come back to the committee separately on that, Colin. But it is a good suggestion. It's well made. Thank you.
Thank you. So,
if there are no other questions or comments today, then it leaves nothing left for me to do but to close the meeting and thank you everyone for attending. Have a nice day.